Hello and welcome to the August 2022 podcast from Le Monde Diplomatique. My name's George Miller, and my guest this month is Maxime Robin, who's a French journalist based in the US. Just a quick reminder before we begin that all previous episodes of the podcast are on the website at mondediplo.com, and you can subscribe to it wherever you get your podcasts so that you never miss another episode. Maxime was in California recently to research his piece in this month's paper entitled The Nuclear Energy Dilemma. In it, he looks at the challenges facing the drought and wildfire-stricken state as it tries to rapidly decarbonise. He spoke to people, including some environmentalists, who want nuclear power to remain part of the energy mix as California transitions away from fossil fuel. And he met campaigners who are glad that Diablo Canyon, California's last remaining nuclear plant, which is situated in an earthquake zone, is scheduled to close in 2025. Or at least, that was its agreed fate, until very recently, as you'll hear in this episode. The issues Californians are facing as the climate crisis worsens are being encountered all over the world. How to deal with the energy shortfall as old fossil fuel plants and aging nuclear reactors are decommissioned and replaced by renewables, given that renewables produce energy that is intermittent and both hard and expensive to store. But Maxime's story also highlights the ways in which the US energy market is distinctive, and that's where we began.
First thing is the US have the biggest nuclear fleet in the world still today. They have around 100 reactors. So in absolute terms, they are the biggest nuclear power providers in the world. But it doesn't look that way when you read the media, when you live in the US, because the US need such a big amount of energy just to live day by day as a nation. Nuclear power represents only 20% of the total, which is a far cry from countries such as where I'm from, France, where it's like around 70% of the total of the electricity production. So I learned also that it was an aging fleet, similar to France. They built big numbers of reactors in the 70s, 80s, and then several things happened. First, it became less and less popular because of an incident at 3 Mile Island. Also because gas was so cheap. It made less sense for utilities. It's not nationalized. You have a lot of players. It's kind of private sector plays a bigger role. And companies, they had less incentive to build nuclear power plants because gas is so cheap. And it's cheap to build a gas plant. Then it's costly in the long run because you need the gas. And the opposite, you need a huge amount of investment to build a nuclear plant. And then in the long run, decades after decades, it makes a lot of sense in an economic point of view. The heavy deregulation that happened in the 1990s in the US kind of killed the impulse to maintain and build new power plants, because with the Reagan and Thatcher era, this move of deregulating the electricity market was something really new in the world. It's usually it's a vertical. The electrical grid is very complex, and usually it's vertical. It's government owned. In the 90s, what happened is they deregulated the market, and it became less and less profitable because they relied on cash flow. In this new approach of the electricity market, it made less and less sense to build nuclear power plants because you want milk out the most money you can. You're here to make money. You're not here to provide a public good, right? In a privatized approach, nuclear power makes much less sense. And that's exactly what's happening in the US. If you see a curve of the amount of power produced by the nuclear fleet, it went up and up and up until the 1990s, and then it stayed flat. And now the fleet is aging, so power plants are closing here and there in the country. And what do you replace it with? That's the big question. That's why I came to California to have a sense of what happens when a nuclear plant closes.
Yeah. You've got that background that you've just described, where you've got the aging fleet, you've got the lack of replacement investment in new nuclear power plants. And then I guess the other factor which makes California a really interesting case for you to look at is indeed the climate aspect. Even if the environmentalist lobby is not driving, the big economic decisions, nonetheless, everything that you're talking about is happening in California against this background of droughts and fires, which are becoming worse. So it's impossible to live in California and not be aware of the threat of climate change.
Of course, George, it's become very urgent now in California, but in basically every part of the world. You just told me that in the UK you had a terrible summer and record-breaking temperatures. In California, they've been dealing with that. And the timing was just great for California because the fight is ongoing about whether they should close that plant or not. The timing was perfect. When I came to California in April, I talked to nuclear advocates, people who wanted the plant to stay open, and they were open with the fact that they had maybe 10% of succeeding. They thought they fought a lost cause. And here we are, 4 months after I met them, and there's a complete 180, a complete U-turn. The government of California took the decision in the first place to close that plant in 2016. Since then, the California Senate passed a bill, Senate Bill 100, in 2018, that requires California to be carbon neutral, zero emissions of their electricity production by 2045. It's getting harder. You need more electricity because of the AC. They also passed a new law that requires people will have to buy electric cars only by 2045. It will be forbidden to sell fuel cars. So California will need more and more electricity because of the environmental crisis. So how do you deal with that? It won't be enough with solar and wind. That is the big issue because of the intermittency of solar and wind. The sun doesn't shine, the wind doesn't blow all the time. And what do you do when solar energy and wind energy doesn't produce any energy? You need a backup plan. That's why it makes sense for more and more people who are more and more aware of the facts to keep that plant open. We talk a lot about the downsides of nuclear power. Everybody knows them. We're all a bit afraid of nuclear power. But the upside is it's carbon-free, it's very compact, and in the long run, it provides a stable electricity. It doesn't matter if the sun doesn't shine. You will always get your power.
It's interesting because California had 2 nuclear plants, and the first of those, so your story focuses on the second, Diablo Canyon, which is still operational, but has been scheduled to close by 2025. But you also write a little bit about the other plant, which is now closed. It closed in 2013, San Onofre. And it offers a really interesting example of what exactly happens when you close a nuclear plant down. You take out the energy which it's supplied to the grid, and then you have to make it up. So it's not like Diablo Canyon is purely hypothetical, because we know what happened when the first plant was decommissioned.
Yeah. When San Onofre closed in 2013, carbon emissions in California get up. When Indian Point in New York closed last year, for the same reasons, for environmental concern, like from pressure from an environmental group called Friends of the River, the New York power plant of Indian Point's closed, and now you got a bigger electricity bill. You got basically more emissions. And the big problem is with climate change, hydropower. Nuclear power and hydropower are the backbones of a carbon-free electricity, according to the EIA. And hydropower will be less and less reliable with climate change. So that's another problem on top of all the problems. The New York plant will be replaced by fossil fuels because hydropower is getting weaker. And this is also what's happening in California. People who advocate for closing the plant, they say, oh, we'll replace it with hydropower. but hydropower is already at its maximum capacity, and it's declining hugely with the drought. California is facing the most severe drought maybe ever seen by man. They call it the megadrought, the drought of the century.
Yeah.
Hydropower is also in deep trouble. And also California was an interesting place because this is the birthplace of US environmentalism. This is where the Sierra Club was born in the beginning of the 20th century. And most interestingly, they haven't been always against nuclear power. In the early 60s, they were hugely against hydropower to the point that they were like, we'd rather do coal, which is kind of ironic today, and we'd rather do nuclear because hydropower destroys aquatic life. Diablo Canyon is so important for the environmentalists in the history of the movement, because around the building of Diablo Canyon, there was a lot of infighting between the environmental movement. Some said nuclear was okay, some said it was not, and basically it made the group explode in the 60s. So Diablo Canyon was also a great place to go because it's a huge symbol for the environmental movement. It was like a wedge.
From your article, there are signs of that wedge in the US, but also in Europe and in the UK. Nuclear is becoming an issue which environmentalists are having to return to readdress, and it is creating divergence where perhaps there might have been unanimity for quite a long time, especially in countries like Germany. But your article reveals that it's kind of back on the table as something that environmentalists really have to think hard about because of the difficulties you've described about making the transition, decarbonising the economy, doing it at speed. And it's looking harder and harder to do that without nuclear being somewhere in the mix.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the generational gap that is more and more clear between different elements of what we could call the green movement. The diehard anti-nuclear people are mostly from an older generation who fought in the 80s, who lived through Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island. It was clear when I went to town hall meetings, debates in California around the future of the Diablo Canyon plant. It's a small world. The pros, the against, people who are interested in the issue. It's a small world in California. Most of Californians, they don't really care. As long as they can switch on put their lights on and go on their day-to-day life, it's not something that people are really fluent in, all these problems. And I mean, I can understand that. It's so complex, and I didn't know it well myself, and I still don't consider myself an expert. It's almost the same at a national level. I was surprised when I was trying to get in touch with people who are advocating for nuclear power in the US. I was surprised. It was really a bare bones operation. You have like this army of bloggers, a few enthusiasts and scientists who have a blog. There is a small news wire, but it's really not much. And that was surprised me most. If you compare it to the power and the clout and the fossil fuel industry and also the renewables, nuclear power is really looks very small. Where I'm from in France, nuclear is a big, it's backed by the government. It looks like a Goliath. But when you're in the US, it really looks like David. It looks like this, like these bloggers trying to defend the energy. And I met one of them, the Mothers for Nuclear in California.
Well, what surprised me was when you get an organization like that, Mothers for Nuclear, you immediately think, is the industry funding them? Is this a kind of, one of those public opinion shaping efforts which industries often make in a sort of soft lobbying? But you say that even the company which owns Diablo Canyon, Pacific Gas and Electric, wasn't backing Mothers for Nuclear, the organization which is campaigning to keep the plant open. And I think that says a great deal, doesn't it, about the nature of the energy market in the US and how these companies see the future, where I guess where they see the profits are to be made. So
Yes.
an aging nuclear plant isn't very attractive to an energy company with a mixed portfolio.
Yeah, it was so ironic to learn that Heather Hof, so she's an employee at the plant and she's trying to keep the plant open. She's doing it against her own employer. She was kind of laughing about the fact that when she was doing an event on a weekend, when she was, and then she came back on the job on Monday, she didn't know how she would be. Maybe she would be, I don't know, like scolded or something, like having a boss come at her and telling her she needs to stop doing all this activism. The employer is PG&E. They don't really advocate for nuclear power because they also own gas plants. They are not laser focused on nuclear power, and there's no real lobby of advocating for nuclear in the US. There is an organization in Washington, D.C., but its members are electrical companies, and these electrical companies, there are some private, some semi-private. It's the US, it's really complicated. But there is no company in the US that's only laser focused on nuclear. So the lobbying is small or non-existent. It has no fangs. It's like nobody's betting on it because of the nature of the market now. Nobody wants to invest billions of dollars in a plant. You have real problems of cost overruns and everything. Only a government could assume the risks. And the electrical companies, they just want to make money quick. They don't want to have a 40-year a project spanning on 40, 50 years. Who knows if they will still be around?
So in April, the Biden administration announced a $6 billion package to extend the life of some of these older nuclear plants. That is recognition, isn't it, that the renewables problem requires some kind of intervention in order to make that transition, and that even these older nuclear plants have a potential part to play. So if new nuclear is hugely expensive and nobody's got the confidence at the moment to invest in that, nonetheless, trying to extend the life of plants like Diablo Canyon in California might make the best sense in a difficult situation.
Yeah, on this, the Biden administration kind of aligned with what you read from the ARCC is to succeed, we're going to need a bouquet. We're going to need lots of renewables. We're going to need also lots of nuclear. This has been a total game changer. This is why when I came in April in California to talk with people, Diablo was almost certain to close. Then the Biden administration passed this bill. And now it's totally reversed. Just today, I Googled news. I checked the news on Diablo. We have a very fresh news from today saying that California should get 1.4 billion of this 6 billion envelope to keep Diablo Canyon open. So this is a huge amount of money. And now Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, who was against Diablo for so many years, he totally changed course. Now he's like, I've advocated that for so many months. His spokesperson talks like he's always been in favor of it. But now he's totally for keeping Diablo open because of this federal money. So this federal money is a total game changer for Diablo Canyon.
It looks to me, Max, that the US energy market's in a bit of a mess. It looks from the outside as though the big picture, the big strategy maybe hasn't been completely thought through in a way that's likely to work. Is it the case that it's like a race to see if they can keep the lights on while waiting for technological advances that will make, you write in the article about storage. That's clearly a big problem with renewables, storing the energy and the intermittency. So trying to find some kind of temporary solution which will keep the lights on until the newer technologies come on stream and can take over from the older ones.
So yes, the US is a complicated market. The key is, you think the US is a country, but energy-wise, it's not. It's like 50 countries, each with their different laws, and it's really hard to understand the different markets. Some are completely state-owned, some are semi-private, deregulated. Some markets overlap between states. In the specific case of California, just like Texas, they have their own market. They buy extra electricity from other states, just like a country like Germany would buy electricity from France. The interesting point about California is they build a lot of solar, to the point that now it's going to be hard for them to build more solar. They are already at their maximum point. Why? Because they have so much solar now that around midday, the solar power plants produce so much energy that California doesn't know what to do with it. And the spot market, which is in this new deregulated environment, we have a market, and this market is called the spot market, and it's reevaluated every hour. And at around noon in California, solar power produce so much electricity that the cost of this electricity is becoming negative. So the producers of electricity will have to pay to deliver the electricity to put it into the grid, because so much electricity is produced at this hour that the grid was always to be really balanced between demand and supply. That's a cardinal rule. The grid is overwhelmed. So the producers will have to pay to deliver the electricity into the grid. So who wants to build a new solar plant now in California? Plus, it's subsidized. So even when the solar panels production or electricity production is subsidized by the state, it doesn't make sense to produce more solar. But at night, when the sun don't shine, these power plants produce zero. So you really need a backup energy. So it's still this old problem. The world realizes that we will need storage. We will need to build storage facilities. So this excess of energy produced by the solar panels during the day could be stored and released in the evening when other people consume their energy in California for cooking, for air conditioning, and so on. The problem is we don't know yet how to store the energy, the electricity with efficiently. This is something that's not easy. So far, we use lithium ion, the same batteries you have in your iPhone. So everybody knows them, and everybody knows that in a few hours they are out of juice, and they have a short lifespan, 5 to 10 years most. So California now is building storage electricity facilities. So you have to figure huge buildings filled with lithium batteries to help with the storage of electricity produced by the solar panels during the day and release it into the night, for example. But the scale by which we will have to build this, it's not sure that it could replace what we're consuming with right now with gas and nuclear. California is an interesting case because it's at the forefront. It's like the canary in the gold mine. It has a means to imagine the energy of the future, and it looks like it will be hard to get rid of nuclear and rely only on renewables such as wind and solar to keep the lights on for the whole state of California.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought. That's exactly why I thought you were sort of drawn to the story, because it does raise so many questions for all our futures. The very last thing I wanted to ask you, Max, was, you said earlier, people are not too worried about the source of their energy as long as the lights come on. And I'm sure that's true of people everywhere. I don't know what the mix is in my electricity. But what kind of impression did you get just speaking to people in California about their sense of the seriousness of the climate crisis? Is that something you feel, you've lived in the States for a few years now, is that something you feel is really kind of going up the agenda in a very serious way? Because there was a time when we in Europe felt that people in the US were in complete denial, and I'm sure that's a caricature, but that was our sense that it wasn't really something which was at the front of people's minds. What was your impression of just being out and talking to people about issues like energy and climate, about how seriously it now is being taken in places like California?
It's really hard to say, George. I think everybody is getting more concerned. some of the polluters are liberals, and some of the people in Texas, they have been building so much wind and solar too. In this story, everything is counterintuitive. I met a lot of liberals that are against nuclear power, for example, but some other liberals would argue that nuclear power is better for the planet because if you close a nuclear plant, you're going to consume more fossil fuels. So some people who think that's the most interesting part of the story, I think, is some people think who are virtuous, who are have a higher understanding of the planet problems. Sometimes they might have misconceptions about the whole thing. For example, the most pro-nuclear states, the only power plant that's being built right now, it's in a republic. I mean, it's in red Republican part of the country. It's in Georgia. So some liberals, the pro-nuclear liberals, will be really happy that a nuclear plant is being built. But so far it wasn't in California, it wasn't in New York. Yeah. It was in the red country. In this story, nothing is easy. Nothing is like the Sierra Club. This is an environmental group. They are advocating for respecting nature, the outdoors and stuff. But at some point, they had subsidies from the fossil fuel industry. I realized it was like a big theater, and you never know. Somebody has a mask, and then he's going to take out the mask, and you never know what's behind. This story was full of tricks because there are no good guys and bad guys.
I was speaking to Maxime Robin, whose piece in this month's paper is entitled The Nuclear Energy Dilemma. You can read Max's article at mondediplo.com. If you're a subscriber, you can also read every edition of the paper going back 25 years and online exclusive content. And if you're not yet a subscriber, there's plenty of open access content online to entice you to become one, including the full archive of this podcast. You'll find all previous episodes on Le Monde Diplomatique's website, and you can also subscribe on your favourite podcast app to make sure you don't miss future ones. In the words of John Berger, why read LMD? To make sense of what's happening in the world behind the misinformation. I hope you'll join me again soon for another interview with one of our contributors. And until then, thank you very much for listening, and goodbye.